21,000 pieces of legislation govern our lives. Anything from the storage of food to working at heights and the musical jingles that you use on an ice cream van and the prices of beds. Do we really need 21,000 rules and regulations? Small businesses, certainly in the past, have always said that this is an overburden of red tape. Terry Irwin joins me, MD of TCii, Strategic and Management Consultancy. Terry, I know that you work with both small businesses and big businesses.
That's right.
But small businesses in particular fear that this is an overburden of red tape. They want to get rid of it. The government wants to get rid of some of it too. It's thrown down its red tape challenge. Is there really an overburden of red tape?
Well, certainly on the basis of the clients we deal with, there's certainly been some reaction to this, particularly with Vince Cable's comment that the feedback that they get is going to be assumed to be correct unless government ministers can prove that's not the case.
So if we as small businesses say get rid of this piece that's no longer of any use to us, ministers will have to prove it has to stay. That's
what we understand, yes. And a lot of the small businesses we work with who should we say, are suffering, seem to have responded quite positively to that.
What are they saying then? What are small businesses saying is wrong with the regulation we've got?
Well, it's just complexity and things that don't seem to make sense and yet do restrict the business. It could be anything from, for instance, we're working with a bakery client whose geographical expansion has been tremendously slowed, in some cases prevented by planning regulations. We've got another client who, with a new building that they're getting constructed, has to put in no smoking signs all around the building, and they're saying, well, is that really necessary these days?
Don't we all know that you can't smoke inside?
Exactly. So there are all sorts of things like that that don't seem to make any sense, don't seem to serve any real purpose, and yet are restricting the small businesses from growing, basically because of the administrative burden and the cost of implementing them.
Employment legislation, health and safety legislation, small businesses quite often moan about those, but really, where would we be without them?
Well, certainly there's no question that the level of protection for the employee is a lot greater now than it was in the past. But the other side of the coin is some small businesses really are finding it difficult to bear the burden of the cost. They've all been through the recession just like everybody else, and they've been struggling, and a lot of businesses, as you know, have gone out of business. So there are some businesses that are literally on the edge, and by having to implement and bear the cost of all of this new legislation, should we say, is really pushing them over that edge.
Taxation is also another thing that there have been a lot of complaints about. It's too complicated. But the government has set up the Office of Simplification of Taxation. They are going to tackle this.
Well, this is it, but some of the comments we're getting back are, well, why wasn't taxation included in this red tape removal exercise? Because it clearly says it's a separate issue, and there's a certain feeling there that perhaps the red tape that's going to be removed is the red tape that doesn't really have the most significant effect on the businesses, but does have the most significant effect on the government.
So we're all quite cynical about this from what you're saying.
There's a certain amount of cynicism, but there's also a degree of optimism as well. There's a lot of our smaller clients are very pleased with this whole exercise of looking at red tape. You know, someone really taking it seriously, someone trying to do something about it. Of course, the proof of the pudding is going to be the eating, so we shall see what happens when the recommendations for removal of red tape go through.
You can go on the government's website. The challenge is that you say to the government, this is what we need to get rid of. The government then asks ministers and civil servants to have a look at it. If they can't justify it staying, it goes, it's out. So we really should take part in this, shouldn't we?
Well, absolutely, and I think this is it. And it's the trick, if you like, is getting rid of the cynicism, the people out there, the small businesses out there who think it's not worth doing anything because nothing's going to happen. I think this is a great chance for them to do something. A small number are already doing that, and hopefully that'll spread throughout small business.
21,000 pieces of legislation. What do we want it reduced to? About 11?
Well, let's just say considerably less. And it's not only what exists, it's also what's coming in as well. So perhaps a reduction in the level of new legislation and red tape that's actually being implemented or introduced every month would be good as well.
And of course, we've seen that moratorium on domestic legislation for micro businesses with fewer than 10 employees. They won't have to enforce any of that domestic legislation for 3 years, but really they're storing up problems for themselves if they don't, are they not? Because at the end of 3 years they're going to have to implement it.
Absolutely, and in that case it's a double-edged sword, because I think they're just avoiding the reality of the situation, and I think yes, all that means is the problem is pushed forward, and it could be pushed forward to a time when they're not perhaps as well prepared to deal with it as if they started dealing with it now.
Well, you're a strategic and management consultancy.
I am. We are.
You are what are you telling your small businesses then in terms of dealing with the rules and regulations that are in, dealing with the rules and regulations that are coming in, dealing with the raft that comes in from the EU?
Well, we're
plan it in, I take it.
We're telling them to plan it in. I mean, it's coming. We're also making them aware of the vehicles like this cutting back of the red tape that exist, where they can, should we say, raise their voices and be heard to do something about that. And we're also pointing out that if they don't take an opportunity like this, it's ultimately going to reflect against the growth of their businesses. And
the government has started with the retail sector, standing here surrounded by shops. Come on, guys. Get in there, get your voice heard. What's wrong with the retail regulations at the moment? Let the government know.
Stand up and be counted.
Stand up and be counted. Terry, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.